Like I said earlier, I'm incredibly excited to be here today. I'm really excited to talk about Facebook. The reason I'm so excited to talk about Facebook is because it's one of the major advertising platforms, and it's really gotten a bad rap over the past year or so. When we talk and when we go through this presentation, one of the main things that has been going on with Facebook is that when you look at advertising dollars spent on Facebook in the majority over the past year, because of the iOS 14 update, it's been largely unsuccessful. Revenue numbers for advertisers is declining on Facebook from a reporting standpoint. Now, when you actually start to look into the data, Facebook's providing incremental uplift, which is something that Patrick talked about earlier on in the day, but from a return on ad spend basis, Facebook looks unprofitable and is deterring advertisers from using the platform. So, getting into that, there is a significant trend that's going on Facebook, and we want to address today what Facebook wants from its advertisers. So to get into that, we have to lay some ground rules. So first, what we're going to do is we're going to review Facebook performance fundamentals. Now, it's a little bit different than Google, but everything can be broken down into metrics that affect performance. And we'll talk about those metrics in a little bit of detail. Then we'll go into a State of the Union address for Facebook, where it currently sits, what's going on in terms of Facebook news, and how that really affects what we do as advertisers. Finally, in parts 3 and 4, what we'll do is we'll actually talk about understanding quality engagements on Facebook and improving how we could improve the buying experience for users on Facebook. And then finally, what we'll do is we'll review how and when to use this information in advertising. So, Facebook performance fundamentals. Like any platform, it can be really broken down into metrics. You have a reporting dashboard that you can directly use to influence what you're doing in advertising and make informed decisions. Now, it's a little bit different than Google, and we'll get into some of that as we talk through this point. But really what Facebook performance can be broken down into is your CPCs, or in some cases, if you're not using a catalog-based campaign, your cost per landing page view, so how much you're paying to acquire a customer, and then 2, how frequently that customer is actually going through and converting on an ad. Inside of those metrics, it's like a Russian nesting doll, where you can actually break down what affects these things. So without going into a ton of detail here, because we'll go into detail on some of these things later on, cost per click can really be broken down into cost per impression and CPM. Then 2, it's going through a similar thing to quality score, which is a mess that Patrick did not want to unpack earlier today, but I'll try to unpack it for Facebook a little bit, which is a representation of quality ranking for your ad. So your ad compared to competitors, how good is the quality of the ad, perceived by Facebook. All of these metrics are perceived by Facebook. Then you have engagement rate ranking. Again, how frequently Facebook believes users will interact with your actual ads. And then finally, your conversion rate ranking. On an ad, how frequently does Facebook believe that a user is going to do the intended action? So all of these wrapped up really calculate what you're going to be paying in terms of a cost per click. I left out one final point, which is incredibly important, which is click-through rate. How frequently are users actually clicking through an ad? How frequently are you getting a user to get to your site? Because an improved click-through rate will affect cost per click. Then going into conversion rate, which I don't want to spend too much time on compared to cost per click, because a lot of these details actually are outside of the Facebook advertising platform and are not controlled by the Facebook advertising platform. Of these points listed, though, the one thing that is affected is 1, audience intent. You're setting forth who you're wanting to target on Facebook. So you can adjust the audience intent by the audience that you're actually targeting within the platform. And then 2, buying experience. Buying experience is the first touch point with the brand. Facebook could be that first touch point with the brand, so you can really affect the start of a buying experience. So, like I said, I don't want to spend too much time on conversion rate because the rest of the metrics aren't directly related to Facebook, and it's very hard to control conversion rate within the Facebook platform. What you can do is you can influence the cost per click. So with Facebook, it is different in terms of how cost per click is determined compared to Google. Most advertisers on Facebook, and I don't know how many of us are on Facebook advertising of the room here, might not know that Facebook is actually on a cost per impression based model. So your auction, you're paying for an impression rather than a click. Google, however, is on a cost per click based model, and you're paying in auction for a click on your ad. Facebook is different because you're actually showing an advertisement in a feed, and it's already prescribed to be an ad. So when you think about this, Facebook is determining what your cost per impression is based off of the previous things mentioned, based off their perception on the quality of the ad compared to your competitors, based off their perception of the ad to get engaged with compared to your competitors, and finally, based off of the perception of Facebook that a user will convert after seeing an ad compared to your competitors. So keep that in mind, because that's the most important thing going forward, is that Facebook's actually determining what you're getting charged in terms of CPM, or cost per impression. So their fearless leader, Mark Zuckerberg, is pictured in this picture on the screen. We'll get into him a little bit later, probably towards the very tail end of the presentation, because he's an incredibly interesting individual. And as you can see, he is somewhat eclectic. But Facebook State of the Union. So Facebook's been in the news. That's how we started off this presentation. That's how we started off this discussion. iOS 14 happened. Facebook advertisers are no longer reported to be as profitable as they were previously. Facebook is facing steep competition from external competitors that it really hasn't seen up to this point. So what's really going on with Facebook? So it's important to understand that Facebook as a platform is really in a competition constantly for market share of your attention. It wants you to spend as much time as possible on the platform interacting with its feed, because that's how it becomes more profitable and gains revenue. Currently, their largest competitor is TikTok. TikTok is incrementally eating their market share. So much so that in 2022, Facebook reported its first loss in revenue of 1%, which doesn't seem like much, but when you start to think about how long Facebook has been active since the early 2000s, it is pretty devastating to them. So it reported its first loss from Q2 of 2021 to Q2 of 2022, and that loss was 1%. So why is this occurring? One, the reason it's really occurring is that Facebook advertisers are no longer reported to be as profitable, and they're pulling back ad spend from Facebook. The second thing is that they're starting to have increasing competition in the market against them. TikTok, I don't know how many people here use TikTok. I refuse to. I feel far too old to use TikTok, and it makes me feel uncomfortable, but that's just me. I know there's plenty of people who actually use the platform. So when you start to look at what TikTok is doing, TikTok is different than Facebook. Facebook originally started out as a news platform and is now shifting into an entertaining platform. TikTok, what it really does is it's a platform that allows entertainment through short form videos. So as you can see in the graphics, in the most recent news, I'm trying to think, November 8th, so today is the 10th. November 8th into the 9th, Facebook laid off 11,000 employees, 13% of its overall workforce, which is vast. It is an incredible thing. It's the largest layoff they've ever had, and it really tells you where they're at in terms of business. So when you start to unpack this, refer back to those 2 points. One, Facebook is facing steep competition from TikTok, and the second thing is that Facebook is becoming less profitable for their advertisers, and less money is being spent with advertising. So, what's Facebook to do in this situation? They know that advertising dollars are no longer as profitable for advertisers, and two, they know that they're facing the steep competition from TikTok. In comes the introduction of Reels. So in 2021, Reels was introduced on Facebook and Instagram as a platform. Just this past year, in 2022, it was introduced to 130 countries across the world. So what really are Reels? Reels are short-form videos that Facebook has on the platform from external people in the entire world. Most of these Reels that are being introduced are not being introduced by the people who are your friends on the platform or your followers. So when you start to look at Reels, it is an opportunity to entertain users with content they haven't seen before. What does this sound like? It sounds a lot like TikTok. So when you start to unpack this and understand where Facebook is going, what it's trying to do is it's trying to increase that market share of your attention by increasing the amount of time that is spent on the app by competing against TikTok, thus making advertising dollars more profitable for their advertisers and gaining that attention share. So this goes back to the question, what does this mean for us as advertisers? What does this mean for the business of Facebook? What does Facebook really want from us? Facebook wants us to start to use more short-term videos and video feed placements. What we're gonna go through in the next couple of slides is a lot of data pulled from our actual accounts. And what this really goes through is describes the trend that you're currently seeing in terms of Facebook and the news and what's actually happening on the platform. So just to remind you, we talked about CPMs earlier. Facebook is charging us on an impression-based model. So Facebook is determining what it wants to charge us to appear in auction based off the content that we're putting forth. So when we start to think about that, it's important to note video placements. So if you start to reference, and this is from 11 e-commerce accounts that we work with as a business, what you start to notice is that CPMs, so that cost per impression, is much lower than average on those video placements. So stories and reels, where it has short form video, are seeing significantly lower CPMs. On average, our CPMs across these accounts was $24. So cost per 1,000 impressions was at $24. Now, if you start to look at cost per impression on stories, they're a little bit lower than average, but still somewhat high at $14 for Instagram stories and $20 for Facebook stories. When you start to look more in depth at Reels, we're at $7.94 for 1,000 impressions on Instagram Reels and $6.09 on Facebook Reels. Now, it's important to note that the spend is probably causing a little bit of an inflation for the net average because we're spending less just as a company on Instagram stories and Reels, but it is incredibly important to realize what Facebook wants from us, which is short form videos, and they want us to appear in short form video feeds. Again, looking as a whole, this is getting away from the placements that we're utilizing, but just looking at the types of content that we're putting out there. What you start to see is that video, on average, is about $10 cheaper per 1,000 impressions than any other type of content. That's even going into what you see as carousel, which in large part are catalog-based ads. Catalog-based ads are incredibly successful for remarketing clients, which is they dynamically show you products that you've interacted with in the past. So it's even cheaper to show than a catalog ad. Now, this goes back into that point, which is that not every impression is created equal. You can actually influence buyer intent by the type of content that you're showing them. Everything that you've heard up to this point kind of really leads into that point, which is that the content that you're putting forward is a direct representation of your brand and can actually affect that buyer experience. So the one thing that's not pictured here is CPCs, which actually sit a little bit higher for video, but that's because on average, people are interacting with video for 15 seconds before they're going away from it. So they're either clicking to site or continuing to scroll through that feed. What that's really doing is that's creating a situation where the user is actually pre-diagnosed to be interested in the product before they're leaving the video or clicking through to site, which is causing that increase in terms of overall conversion rate, and which is causing a lower overall cost per acquisition for those customers. So, in this example, what we would say to you is start the investment in short form videos. I know it's more expensive to create them, but in large part, you're going to be more effective at reaching a prospecting audience, and the engagement that you're actually gaining with that customer is going to have better quality. And it's just a better overall buying experience. A still image ad can only do so much. It doesn't convey what you're doing as a business, and it's not nearly as impactful as short form video. Now, I say this with the precursor that Patrick previously mentioned, which I continually butcher, which I don't know where he is, and he'd probably correct me on this, but never, never, never always, which is this in a vacuum makes complete sense, but there's often times where still image ads outperform video, but going strictly from what Facebook wants from us, they want us to show short form video. And this was even addressed in Q3 earnings call from Mark Zuckerberg. In that call, what he directly stated was that Reels was accounting for $3 billion in an increased revenue over the past year for Facebook, and hasn't even been introduced for that full year. And what he goes on to address is that he doesn't see this going away anytime soon. What he says is there are now 140 billion Reels played across Facebook and Instagram each day, and that's a 50% increase from 6 months ago. So this is continually on the rise, and Facebook is going to continue to try to compete against TikTok, and this is how they're doing it. So going back into the whole situation, I have a great video because Mark Zuckerberg, like I said, is an incredibly interesting individual, and I want to bring some lightheartedness to this heavy content-focused presentation. So before we switch over to AdScape, who's going to go through how we determine quality ads and quality videos to show on these placements, I would just want to show you a quick video.
Hey everyone, from